Over the last 11 months, I've been using the iPhone 7 as my main phone. Today, I decided to talk about the specifications of the phone and review them to let people know if it's worth buying. This is the iPhone 7 specs video. Hello everybody, my name is Matt and this is Real World Review. What I'm going to do is go over the specs of the phone, and at the end I will score the phone based on my personal experiences as a user and cell phone repairman. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section or on Twitter at MattofRWR. Let's get started. To start, our first category is the outside hardware. The first thing you notice when seeing the front of the phone is the display. The display is a 4.7 IPS LCD that is LED backlit. The screen resolution is 1334 by 750, totaling 326 pixels per inch, which technically makes it a 720p screen. The contrast ratio is 1400 to 1. This display is a wide color display P3, which allows the screen to display more accurate colors when compared to a standard IPS LCD. The screen also has dual domain pixels, which helps produce better viewing angles. The brightness of the screen is 625 lux, making it 125 lux brighter than the iPhone 6s. The glass does have an oleophobic coating on the front to make it fingerprint resistant, along with being ion strengthened to help prevent the glass from cracking easily. Display zoom and reachability are available on the phone, but they are software features and have been available since the iPhone 6. There is more to the front of the device than just the display. The top portion houses one of the two stereo speakers and doubles as an earpiece. Above that is the proximity sensor as well as the ambient light sensor. There is a microphone, one of the four on the device, hidden next to the earpiece that is used for Siri and dictation. The front camera is a 7 megapixel camera and will be explained in a couple minutes. On the bottom portion is the new home button that does not click. It uses the second generation Apple Taptic engine and emulates a click, although it still doesn't feel like a normal click. The button also functions as a fingerprint scanner, which Apple calls the Touch ID. Next, we move on to the frame. On the bottom of the device is 12 circular holes and one oval-shaped hole. On the left side there are holes for the second of the 4 microphones, while on the right the holes are for the second speaker and the third microphone. In the middle of those holes are the only 2 screws on the outside of the device. I would say these keep the phone together, but there is a very strong adhesive that goes around the display and the frame that seems to be more effective. In the middle, there is an 8-pin lightning jack that supports USB 2.0. Note that there is no area for the headset jack. Some say it's courageous, I call it bold. On the right side of the device is a power button along with a SIM card tray, which are both made out of metal. On the left side of the device is a ring/silent rocker and volume up and volume down buttons, which are also made out of metal. And on the top there is nothing, not even a microphone or antenna line. On the back of the device is a sapphire camera lens, the 4th microphone which is used for video recording and speakerphone calls, along with the quad LED True Tone flash. Under all that is a metal Apple logo that is separate from the frame. The frame is technically a unibody aluminum Series 7000 frame with 2 plastic antenna lines separating the 3 pieces of aluminum. As for the size, the device is 138.3 millimeters tall, 67.1 millimeters wide, and 7.1 millimeters thick, or 5.44 inches tall, 2.64 inches wide, and 0.28 inches thick. As for the weight, the iPhone 7 is 138 grams, or 4.87 ounces. With the charging port being the only way to get into the phone is waterproof. Well, actually water resistant, with the IP67 certification. Now that we're done with the outside of the device, let's move on to the cameras. The rear camera is 12 megapixels with a quad LED True Tone flash. The camera is a backside illuminated sensor. Other information about this sensor is that the aperture is f1.8, focal length is 28 millimeters, camera sensor size is 1/3 of an inch, and the pixel size is 1.22 micrometers. It also has optical image stabilization for still photos and videos, and a 6-element lens. The camera is capable of many software options like capturing raw image, touch to focus along with autofocus, which is done by focus pixels, face and body detection, live photos, which now has a better stabilization, a 3 or 10-second timer, digital zoom of 5 times, high dynamic range or HDR, burst mode, panorama up to 63 megapixels, and geotagging. As for video recording, this phone has many different options. You can record 4K at 30 frames per second, 1080 at 30 or 60 frames per second, 720p at 30 frames per second, and slow motion video can be captured at 1080p or 720p at 120 frames per second or 240 frames per second, respectively. While recording, the digital zoom will zoom up to 2 times and can support the time-lapse video option. This phone also allows for continuous autofocus when recording and allows you to zoom while watching videos in the Photos app. The front camera is a 7 megapixel sensor, which is a boost from the 5 megapixel 6S camera, and is also backside illuminated. It allows for 1080p recording, which is assumed to be at 30 frames per second. The aperture is higher than the back camera at f2.2. And just like the back camera, it has many software features like body and face detection, auto stabilization, burst mode, exposure control, 3 or 10-second timer, HDR, and Retina flash. It should be noted that there is no autofocus or focus for that matter. The next category is the inside hardware, starting with the processor. The processor in the phone is a 64-bit A10 Fusion chip with an M10 Motion coprocessor. It is a 16 nanometer quad-core processor, 2 being Hurricane cores and 2 being Zephyr cores, that run at up to 2.34 GHz, although Geekbench tells me that there are only 2 cores. Geekbench gives the phone a score of around 3,476 for a single core and 5,724 for the multi-core test. The GPU is a hexa-core Power VR Series 7XT GT 7600 Plus that runs at 670 MHz and 257 GFLOPS. When testing the GPU, Geekbench gave me the score of 12,124. The phone has 2 GB of RAM, while the 7 Plus has 3 GB of RAM. Moving on to the network and connectivity. The model I'm reviewing is the A1778 model, which in this case is running off T-Mobile. The phone supports 1G, 2G, 3G, and 4G, assuming that the market still supports those. The LTE bands that are supported are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 12, 13, 17, 18, 19, 20, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 38, 39, 40, and 41, which are the same as the A1660, A1661, and A1784. As for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi chip is a 802.11 A, B, G, N, AC with MIMO, and the Bluetooth is version 4.2. This phone also supports GLONASS, AGPS, Digital Compass, and iBeacon. As for the battery, it is a 1960 mAh lithium-ion cell, which is the largest in any 4.7-inch iPhone. The battery lasts all day, although Apple claims up to 13 hours of video playback, 40 hours of audio, 12 hours of internet use on LTE, 14 hours of talk time on 3G, and 10-day standby. This phone can be charged with a 2-amp charger, although the phone comes with a 1-amp charger standard. So an iPad charger will charge the phone up to 2 times faster. Next we get into software. There are many software features that Apple added into iOS 10, and here are just a handful of noteworthy features. Deleting certain built-in apps. New sounds like the keyboard sound and lock tone. The lock screen has been completely redesigned. The Messages app now has different GIFs, stickers, apps, games, and much more. Siri now supports many different commands like calling for an Uber. There was a much needed update to the Apple Maps, though I will always use Google Maps. Raise to Wake was a feature added on with the iPhone 6S and newer to compete with LG's Knock-On along with the always-on display for other phones, but it's not exactly the same. As for audio playback, this phone supports AAC, MP3, both up to 320 kilobits per second, Apple Lossless, AIFF, and WAVE. As for video playback, it supports H.264 up to 4K 30 frames per second, high profile level 4.2 with AAC LC audio up to 160 kilobits per second, Dolby audio up to 1008 kilobits per second, .mov, .m4v, and .mp4 files. With the specs of the phone explained, let's score the phone and decide if it's worth the purchase. Note that the phone costs $650 US for the 32GB version, $750 for the 128GB version, and $850 for the 256GB version. It should also be noted that this phone is 11 months old and most people will want to buy the phone used, and the scoring does account for that. Let's start with the frame. It is aluminum with a very small amount of plastic, but there are some issues. While bending is practically gone, the issue comes from the headset jack. Sure, the phone fits perfectly in the hand, but they removed the headset jack. It doesn't add battery, and they made the Taptic engine way bigger than the one in the iPhone 6s, which worked perfectly fine. As for waterproofing, the only seal on the phone that I can find was a SIM card tray and around the home button. The adhesive seal around the display may wear out in the future and make it possible for some water to get in when the phone is submerged. Apple has definitely improved in making the power button and home button less likely to go out, but it is still possible for the power button to get stuck or be very difficult to push. The home button doesn't have a compressor, so it can't go out, which is a plus. However, it is still glass. When the home button cracks, the customer can't simply replace a button at all. It is required that they go to Apple or have their carrier's insurance replace the phone. I have not figured out a way to replace this home button, and have talked to many people who repair phones about this issue, and they say that Apple has figured out a way to block people from changing the home button. On the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6s, when the home button broke, it could be replaced, with the only caveat being that the Touch ID will no longer work. However, the home button would still click and function as a normal home button. Even though I seem to be bashing the phone, the frame has never given me an issue in my 11 months of use, and I am in the middle of nice and mean to the phones. With that said, the phone is in very good condition. With the removal of the headset jack and the not so perfect speaker, I will give the outside hardware an 8 out of 10. Next is the screen. To me, the screen is now small. It is the same size and almost the same resolution as the Samsung S3, which is very disappointing. With this said, it is still a very nice screen. The issue I ran into is the fact that this phone was made in 2016 and the first 1080p phone was made at the end of 2012 by HTC called the Droid DNA. Apple still uses a lower resolution than a phone that was released almost 5 years ago. Sure, the iPhone 7 Plus has a 1080p screen, but the Droid DNA and the iPhone 7 have a very similar footprint. Even though I have issues with this screen, it is still pretty crisp and doesn't cripple my hands to use it. The screen does not look washed out, has very good viewing angles, and is pretty bright, so I'll give the screen a 7 out of 10. Next is the inside hardware. Now this iPhone is obviously the fastest iPhone out, and the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus only differ performance-wise with the amount of RAM that is given in each phone. With this said, the iPhone 7 does not have a RAM issue. While the battery is not horrible, it could be better. In 2 years, Apple has increased the battery 150 milliamps or 7.7% and removed the headset jack for a 7.7% increase. Obviously, the headset jack was removed for other reasons, and it is obvious that it was not removed for a bigger battery. The performance of the phone is awesome, and the score is only affected by the very small increase in battery life and the poor space management on the inside, giving inside hardware an 8 out of 10. Next is the camera. I only have one issue with the camera, which can be fixed by a software update. The camera is lacking proper professional options, like changing the ISO, white balance, and focus point manually. Now this complaint is pretty small because the camera is still amazing. The video recording, even at 1080p 60 frames per second, is amazing, and I have no issue with that. Overall, I would give the camera a 9 out of 10. Now the software is something that will change. For example, my phone is running iOS 10.1.1 and will most likely never see iOS 11 as long as I own it. My phone is also jailbroken and gives me features that Apple blocks or does not give people. They lose a point for that. Also, this phone will most likely run every software until iOS 14 or 15, or whatever they call it in the future. If history repeats and this phone is no different from any other iPhone, it will become horrible to use on the last software that Apple gives it. This is not the phone's fault, but rather Apple's fault. Since the OS changes all the time and can be modified, I will not put this in the scoring along with the rest of the phone, but I will still give it a 7 out of 10. The last score that I feel that is more important than anything I've talked about so far is whether or not this phone is future-proof. Now this is more than just a simple score. There's a lot of thinking that really goes into it, and also a lot of guessing that goes into it. So let's start with the major faults of the phone. So for the major faults, I narrowed it down to 3 subjects. the fact that there's only one port left, the software, and the battery. When you look at the bottom of the phone, you only notice one port, but there's a bunch of different issues. In a world quickly moving to USB-C, the Lightning port is starting to become outdated, even though it was only released in 2012. This port has been put onto a few iPods, many different iPads, and many different iPhones, and that's it. It has not been put onto any computers or anything else that's not made by Apple. This wouldn't be too much of an issue, but Apple is already deciding that USB-C may be the future and has been putting it into most of their computers, if not all of them by now. And sure, the computer that I'm using is a 2012 and I'm not really looking forward to getting a 2017, but you have to think that the MacBook is a very common computer that people are already buying or that they will be buying in the future, and this will require them to use an adapter just to connect their iPhone to their MacBook. In the future, this shouldn't be an issue and people will adapt just like Apple did by removing FireWire. Same can be said about the Lightning port. It used to be that Apple changed the port and people have an issue with it, but now it's the fact that Apple hasn't changed the port and people are having an issue with it. One extremely small issue is the fact that the phone does not support USB 3.0. Sure, data transfer is pretty fast, but with the addition of the 256GB iPhone and the rumored 512GB iPhone, transferring large amounts of data will take a very long time. My 35GB of music takes about 20 to 30 minutes to transfer every time I put my music library onto a phone. USB 3.0 is only supported on the iPad Pro with a 16-pin charger, but Apple is only 8 pins away from adding that to an iPhone. The removal of the headset jack is a pain, and it will be for a while. However, this is a step Apple had to take. This step gives the customer one less port for Liquid or Lint to get into. Their approach with accidentally making people think that they have to buy the $160 AirPods in order to use headphones wirelessly was a horrible idea. Trust me, many customers were convinced by Apple that the iPhone 7 came with the AirPods or would only work with the AirPods, a device that was not released for almost a quarter of a year. That is insane to me. The headphone jack removal isn't that bad at first, but then you remember how many adapters you need. For me, I need 4. That means other than the one that's supplied in the box, I have to pay an extra $30 or more depending on which one I want to get. Apple is stuck in a weird position because they should have removed it when people started complaining about it. Then again, we did complain about the lack of water resistance, and look where that got us. Moving on is the software. Now this is going to be something that we will have to guess with, because it is possible that Apple will kill this phone in the future with the over-the-air updates, or they won't. It is assumed that they will stop supporting the phone on iOS 14 or iOS 15, at which point the phone will be lucky to be worth $200. The phone will get better, peak, and then turn into a modern day iPhone 5S in the next 3 to 4 years, which is sad. What people fail to grasp, however, is the fact that tech moves so fast and things released 9 months ago are worth half of what they are worth now. You can already find these phones starting at $300 on eBay. Hopefully the software won't kill the phone over time, but I have a feeling that history will repeat. Lastly is the battery. The battery works fine for a while, but it becomes obvious that these batteries are no different from the previous iPhones and will need to be replaced. My 11-month-old iPhone is over 300 charge cycles, which means my battery should be replaced soon. After 400 charge cycles, my phone will most likely start dying at 20% and then 30%, and eventually it'll only last 5 minutes off the charger. This is because Apple is constantly using lithium-ion batteries, which had a good run but needs to be changed soon. Using lithium-ion batteries is a tactic that pretty much every company uses to convince people to either buy a new battery from that company or get the phone replaced altogether, so I really doubt that that will change anytime soon. With all this said, I do have to come to a point where I score this. I have rambled on way too much about whether this phone is future-proof or not, and I believe that yes, this phone is future-proof and receives a 7 out of 10. Overall, the score for the specs of the phone is 39 out of 50, or 78%. This is not a bad phone, and it is obvious because I've been using it for almost a year. With that said, it is not perfect. The price seems a little bit too high at $650, and 32 gigabytes is not enough. Give people 64 gigabytes for the same price, and the future-proofing score will get bumped to an 8. One day, Apple will be able to make the perfect phone, but that won't be for a long time. And that's it. Let me know what else you want me to review in the comment section below, and I have a question for you. What would you change on the iPhone 7 other than the screen, the battery, and the headset jack? Let me know. Thanks for watching.